a lot of us on the team have stopped using plan mode because the model just thinks correctly. The agents and this models overall are much more intelligent than maybe even right now we're utilizing them. If we were to freeze model development right now, we'd probably still be figuring out new capability overhang for another 6 or 12 months. Some people look at you when you're making a startup and be like, why are you doing this? It's not the safe thing to do anymore, and it was for a long time at Silicon Valley. You just have to be excited about the exploration and uncertainty.
Many of you maybe have met Thariq when he has come back and spent some time during our AI startup school demos, which have been awesome. But it was so great that we wanted to give you a full hour just for conversation and Q&A. But as I mentioned, a member, now alum, and kind of one of the faces of Claude Code. But let's spend a little time kind of bringing people up to speed on your journey, almost your -1 journey, and your time at Anthropic. So you joined a year ago, and we haven't actually talked about this. What went into that decision? What brought you there? And then we'll get into a little bit of what the last year has been like, which I'm sure has been fascinating.
Yeah, totally. So I ran a VC-backed gaming company for 5 years before joining SPC. And I had always I was trying to make it into an AI gaming company, and my co-founders would not do it. And so around 2024, I had decided to shut down the company and return funds. And I was debating between joining I was talking to the Cursor team a lot because I'd actually been using Cursor. But then I was like, no, I am going to try and start a new company. And I joined South Park Commons. And I think that I actually really felt that was a really pivotal moment for me, especially because of the small groups. So we were in a little squad, and in that squad, I met Tom, who now runs Goodfire, and Sawyer, who is just one of the smartest AI engineers I know.
Fire squad.
Yeah. So I was just sort of going through it. I was sort of mourning my old company and trying to figure out what, could I make another company, or was I good at this AI stuff or something, And talking to Tom, who had sort of led interpretability at DeepMind and sent me these papers, and I was like, oh yeah, it's not that hard, I can start doing work here and contributing. And so I worked for Tom's company for about 3 months. Yeah. So after SPC, I worked for Tom's company, and then while I was doing that and wrapping that up, Sawyer texted me being like, dude, have you used Claude Code?
What month?
This was March 2025, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's like, Opus 4 just came out. It's so much better than Cursor. And I was like, no, I haven't, but I got into it and I was immediately just really, really hooked. And I was like, I need to sort of join Anthropic, and doesn't matter what they want me to do there, I'll do it, I think initially I joined as what do they call it? A demo designer on the design team. And I was just like, dude, if you think that's what I can do, sure, you know what I mean? And then ultimately, very quickly found myself on the Claude Code team, yeah.
I guess on that note, you have sort of become one of the faces of Claude Code. Was that intentional or organic? I mean, I think you've historically liked technical writing, but how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my specific interest was sort of trying to increase the communication bandwidth between humans and agents. And so I feel that the agents and this models overall are much more intelligent than maybe even right now we're utilizing them. When I joined the Claude Code team, one of the first features I introduced was this thing called ask user questions. So during the flow, especially during planning, Claude Code might be like, hey, let's stop and clarify what you're trying to do, right? And I think previous to this, people would just sort of it was very dependent on the user to in detail explain what they want and know the unknown unknowns, for example. And so that was something where I felt has become one of the most popular features in Claude Code, really changed how people interact with the agent. But I also felt the more time I've spent on it, I actually feel it's more important to educate humans than improve the agent UX sometimes. Because as the models get smarter, there's just way more stuff that they can do. And how do you build a mental model of how to prompt Claude is really maybe more valuable, or I'm better at it than doing more product work.
I'd be curious being on the inside, and we'll get into we'll unpack, how to get the most out of Claude in a sec. But I think a lot of us had this moment in February of this year with 4.6. That was kind of this moment where the model got significantly better and the long horizon reasoning was at a point where you could actually see yourself doing like really meaningful, big work. Internally, when was that moment for you guys or for you personally? Where you're like, obviously you saw that in March of 2025 with 4, but was there a moment in between in advance of when we saw it publicly where it kind of hit you?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question. I think that, yeah, for me, the moment was Opus 4. Not that Opus 4.5 was not better at doing long-running tasks, but I just think you could sort of see the progression of it. And I think I was actually surprised by how popular Opus 4.5 was, kind of. Like, I thought it was a jump, but I don't think I realized how much like, I think there are subtle things where, like, if you're good enough at prompting, maybe the previous generation of models can do it, but like then the next generation just does it automatically, you know? And so I think it feels a lot like, it doesn't feel to me like a single eureka moment. I think it's like you spend time with the models all the time and you sort of develop these habits. And sometimes you find things that, like, you know, we've sort of like been exposed to for a while and then we release to the world and people forget how big the jump can be sometimes. Yeah.
So one last like quick hit intro. What was the first thought that came to mind when you heard that Karpathy was joining? And when was that?
I mean, I'm excited. I don't do pre-training, you know, so I think it's obviously like a good signal in the sense that, like, Karpathy, you know, cares about education a lot, but also is a great researcher. And like, where do you spend your time, especially like automating pre-training? Yeah, I mean, like, if he thinks that's the best place to spend his time, I think that's a strong signal.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of you have heard like a phrase we use here, but, you know, best founders being super talent greedy. And when I saw it, I was like, they're talent greedy. That's amazing. And magnetic to be able to land Andre there. That's awesome. Well, let's get kind of into the sort of a little more the technical discussion. And something you've tweeted about, but also I know Claude has talked about, is sort of like avoiding the capability overhang and like making sure that you're building sort of on the exponential. Let's spend a couple minutes, like, why don't you expand on that? But I think what's most interesting maybe to this audience, especially given where you sit, is to the extent that you can sort of bring forward some live examples of you guys building. It's very meta. You guys are building Claude to then allow us to use Claude, but like in the ways that you build, how you actively think about those two concepts.
Yeah, so capability overhang is like when we think the models are smarter and more intelligent than maybe the harness or the interaction with the user like allows them to express, basically. And I think that this is probably like a forever problem in the models. I think like if you were to freeze model development right now, and like we'd probably still be like figuring out new capability overhang for like another like 6 or 12 months, you know? The key thing to note, I think, is that the models do get smarter. They are getting smarter with every generation, but they get smarter in these like spiky, non-intuitive ways. I think it's like a really exciting problem to try and figure out how to do it or how to like utilize that. So for example, like in 2024, the common like thesis was like, oh, the way that models will get really good at coding is that our context windows will get really huge, right? There'll be like 100 million token context windows, and like you just fit the entire code base in it, and then it just solves it, right? But then, you know, with Claude Code, you're like, oh no, actually, what if the models can build their own context, right? And if they can build their own context, then they'll be able to solve this problem in a different way. But if you didn't have that realization, like you would have just been waiting for the 100 million context window, right? The models get better in these like hard to explain ways that are like, you just have to grok internally. So one thing I've been thinking about a lot recently is plan mode, right? And so plan mode, when it first came out, was like a kind of an Opus 4 feature, I'd say, where you're like, hey, I need the model to think very clearly ahead of time about the plan and then execute it, because like it's not smart enough if I just asked a question to do it. And now a lot of us on the team have stopped using plan mode because the model just like thinks correctly, right? And it just like knows how to execute something if you give it enough detail. But then the problem is still like, okay, well, if the model's that smart, like why is it not perfect? You know, like what are the reasons people are not able to like fully utilize it? And some examples are, there's a lot of ambiguity. So I wrote a lot about HTML recently in a way of like trying to understand how can you understand what they're doing more so that you can be sure that this is what you want, right? I think another like feature that we released just today is called workflows. And workflows are an interesting way of, like addressing the capability overhang because it essentially creates a custom harness on the fly. An example of a custom harness is like deep research, for example. Like deep research is a task where you need to maybe do 100 different search results, right? And before, what we'd do is we'd manually code that up and like have a harness that does it. Now with workflows, Claude makes that harness on the fly and then executes it. And so it's a way of like that us utilizing that capability overhang where if we had just prompted Claude Code like, oh, hey, like spend a lot of time thinking about this research, or like it will not be able to do it within its context window or even with subagents. But if you create like this custom harness on the fly, it can, right? And so
how does somebody plan for that? Because Opus 4.8 came out today and I'm a little bit behind, so I actually don't even know what was released there. But if we use that as an example of workflows, how would somebody plan ahead of time in terms of making sure that whatever they're building, whether or not it's the prompts or the skills or the agents, are going to be well positioned to take advantage of like the next leap versus then having to go back and sort of like rebuilding it or overfitting for like what you think the capabilities are today?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like just a really hard problem. I think that like practically we rewrite a lot of the Claude Code harness all the time. And I think that like in order to stay on the frontier, you probably have to, I think that one way of thinking about it is like you're trying to consume end like outcomes, right? And so like you can sort of plan for the outcomes to get better, even though you don't know exactly how like that process will work.
Maybe we're jumping ahead because I did want to touch on, so early May, you guys had a developer conference. Show of hands, who was there? A couple of people. And there are a lot of good videos. You guys actually do a pretty good job with content. But one of the key principles for at least agent design is sort of this like evals for hill climbing. And I'd be curious how recursive Anthropic's development is, where there's a new model, you're sort of discovering like what are the new capabilities. Do you apply that principle to like, I built this thing, now let's switch out the model, now let's like run a bunch of evals very quickly and then have it sort of recursively figure out how to change itself so it takes advantage of the new capabilities? Or let's maybe touch a little bit on like that concept, but also this broader concept of like, how do you just allow the system to continue to improve?
Yeah.
And specifically, how does Anthropic do it?
Yeah. I think so. I think Aparthy put out auto research a couple months ago, right? Which is like this example of a harness that, given a goal, like reduce the loss function, is just like iterates until it does it. And it does like some weird stuff sometimes, but it like usually like it works, right? So I think that's the like concept of like, okay, I think the models have gotten better at this like verifiable result thing. I think recently Jared from Bun rewrote Bun into Rust, and this is another example of like something where if you just give the model a really intense test suite, for example, it can just like do the task. And so, yeah, I think that like when you have like, I think this is a new model capability. I think evals, we don't often use them for new feature development. You know what I mean? So like, for example, for workflows, we wouldn't like be like, okay, we have this like long horizon task eval, and like, let's like build the workflows feature and just like figure out if it works. I think evals are not a 0 to 1 thing. And so like for me, a lot of startups maybe should not be making evals and just sort of like be iterating fast and building an intuition for if they're like, if it's working.
Is it at scale or at the point where it's like, there's a bunch of stuff that you can now ship that is like largely alpha and you're just experimenting, which you wouldn't take the time to build a bunch of evals for that. But like once it's baked in and you need to maintain, improve, that's probably where you invest in kind of a good.
Maybe, yeah. I think that there is a challenge that a lot of founders run into in that like they build the first system and then they need to manage people to build the next system or to continue it. And then evals become a way of legibility into that. I don't think that's necessarily the same as driving a result. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think like, yes, like if you have an eval, you can manage against that eval. But I think honestly, it's kind of an art, quite late into the process. I think, yeah.
Even at Anthropic.
For some parts of it, yeah, yeah.
One other concept that I think people are still coming around to, and it's like, obviously we're literally talking about 4 points like coming out in February. So not a lot of time has elapsed, but people are starting to think about like, how do you decompose, especially with agents themselves, whether or not you're building them internally or as part of your product for customers. How do you get really smart about structuring agents and decomposing them? And there's been a lot of chatter around at what point do you start to break these up as sub-agents, and there are a lot of reasons to do that. Love for you to expand a little bit on like the current thinking at Anthropic, but also maybe a couple examples of where you guys are building this stuff internally and you've sort of hit these moments where you either, that was sort of like the foundation for that principle and then obviously sharing with others, or where it was really important to do. Because I think a lot of us, and I think we've shared, we're building a lot of this internally at SBC. So we're like live having these debates around when is this too bloated? When do I sort of like refactor it so it's multiple skills, multiple sub-agents?
Yeah, this is really, really hard. I think that the art of like this like harness engineering, which can be the harness, it can be skills, it can be how you prompt, is like a really rare skill right now, and that like it's hard to know if you're even good at it or not sometimes, because
is it still like, is this still mostly human taste even with Anthropic, or are you starting to do a lot of this recursively where you would try to imbue meta agents to help kind of get everybody to do this properly?
Yeah, well, so I mean, Anthropic is not like a single like, monolithic entity. Yeah. And so everyone has different opinions, right? And I think that this like self-recursive like harness thing is, some people are into it. I think other people are not, you know what I mean? And I think that like, it's
of the Claude Code team.
It's a mix.
Okay.
Yeah. I think we try and see what works, but I think like something like workflows, for example, which I think is huge, and I think I'm excited for everyone to try it out, is definitely something where we saw it internally just do really well, and we're like, oh shit, this is just sick. And it did help drive some results, like the Rust rewrite, but yeah, also we like, we use the models every day, and it was better. So yeah.
Switching gears a little bit, and by the way, as I mentioned, if you have a burning question already, just raise your hand and we'll kind of get you in, and I'll continue to ask. I see Jason there, so we'll have you queue up. One quick one while we're transitioning to that is like, when you came to startup school, you shared some of your favorite prompts. Like they were kind of meta prompts, right? The types of things that you can ask the model to make you better at your building. Can you share some of those again? Because I thought it was helpful, or some of the new ones. And I forget specifically the specific one you shared at startup school, but I love that line of thinking of just like, what are the meta prompts that are useful?
Yeah, I'm trying to work on a post about this as well. I think that like,
follow Thariq on Twitter. He's already, what are you, like 250,000 followers now? It's a big deal.
Yeah. I think that like the way I think about it is, okay, when you have a task, you have like known knowns, like you want this, but like maybe is it in the prompt or not? Like, did you write it down? Then you have unknown knowns. So you're like you think you want it, but like you don't know it until you see it. You know what I mean? And then you have like unknown unknowns where you just like don't know that this is possible, and you like don't understand the system well enough or something, right? And then you have like known unknowns where you're like, oh, I don't know how this works, but I would like to figure it out, right? And so I think for every problem, analyzing it along those dimensions helps me pull out like, okay, this is how I should prompt the model, right? And so, for example, like if I'm just being lazy about prompting, sometimes what I like to ask the model is like, hey, like interview me about this problem, So like, here is my idea. Let me like interview me using the Ask User Question tool, and then I'll answer. So like that's one example. Is sometimes if it's like, okay, I'm working on a design and I know what I'll know it when I see it, I'll ask it to like do a bunch of explorations. And so I'll be like, okay, explore this design and make a bunch of mock-ups in HTML and show it to me. And then of those like whatever 4, then I might ask it to do more like exploration there. But like, again, it's like in my head, I have some preference, but I don't know yet, right? I think a meta prompting technique there is like, if you're still figuring something out, do you want to do it in a cheap way? So like, if you're doing UI, it's cheaper to do it in HTML because it's fake. Like you're not rewriting the state and the like, all this other wiring up stuff, right? Like if you ask a model to add a button in HTML, it's just a button, but inside of your app, like maybe there's a new route, there's a new like reducer, all of this stuff, right? And so in the same way that like, you can do this for like backend endpoints and testing and things like that too. Just like, what's the cheapest way to figure out like, is this the thing that you want, right? So, yeah.
Jason?
Do you have any advice around whether we should say thank you? Because it does, I'm imagining it probably is a good signal of like, you did good, it's like, yay. Or is it like just a complete absolute waste of tokens?
This is actually like an interpretability question, which I like, I learned a lot about at Goodfire. I think that like probably it's hard to say. I don't think we run like a thank you eval, but we have done some research recently about like emotions in Claude. And if you are mean to it, it does activate this like person is being mean to it feature, and it does guide results in some way. I think that like, I don't think we've done like SWE bench against like meanness or something, but yeah, I am generally like positive for the models. I think in the same way that you should be like, nice to most things, and the very least, so that you're not embarrassed to share your transcript with me. Because I definitely run into bugs sometimes. I'm like, oh, great. Like, I can help you. Just like send me the transcript. And they're like,
so it reveals you're a terrible person.
Yeah. But I've literally had people be like, please don't judge me for this. It was like a really long and tough night. I'm like, okay, I got it. Yeah.
I have a quick question about how you think about the design of Claude Code and the harnesses. One of the things that is kind of emerging across the landscape is that we're seeing convergence across things like different skills or approaches. And I'm wondering internally if there is any type of debate around that, whether there are going to be different architectural approaches across the different platforms, or whether you believe that there's going to be one unified way to do maybe a couple things or even everything.
Like, are you asking across models, like if the same skills across like Opus and GPT, or like just
things like memory learning, question planning, they were a little staggered in terms of their rollout, and different platforms and harnesses picked it up. But the thinking behind that is probably quite similar in terms of what needs to be true to make something work.
Yeah, memory is a great one. Like, I think that memory is extremely, extremely high dimensional problem, and like, how do you do it, right? Like some people like do it in a RAG, like we do in file search, like do you do it in training, like what are your RL environments, like all of these things. I think that like it is, I will say, very, very fun to build, for example, like a custom memory system. I think the thing that I see sometimes with like startups is like the founders build a V1 or something for a certain set of capabilities, and they're never able to hire someone to build the V2. And so your memory system is just like whatever you did initially for like Opus 4 or something. And then like, because harness engineering is so rare, it's like they can't, and it might even outperform like our memory stuff, right? Because it's your own specific problem, or you might have a specific insight. But then like, how do you stay on it is really tough. And I think that like, generally I try and like, I think it's good to build scaffolding, but I think like deleting stuff is really important, and just being like, okay, like, hey, the model is good at this now. I think Opus 4.7 and 4.8 are really good at writing and reading memory via files. And, that's how we sort of expect our memory to be done. And so I think like once there's sort of a consensus, I think it's like unusual to like keep your like bespoke scaffolding in the same way that like I think like RAG, especially for context search, is now like maybe an anti-pattern, and that you should use like grep instead. But if I know plenty of startups that built a RAG indexing thing in like 2024, and so yeah, I think that's one of the difficulties of like scaling your startup.
I have a question around running a long running task versus smaller scope tasks, running them in parallel. Because if you are running a long running task, then you are dependent on a lot of auto compaction. And then how do you have the right validations for that? So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, across the Claude Code team, there are different people with different opinions. Some people are very, very long running task build. I am like, I think that for me, I prefer somewhat shorter task. Unless there's something clearly ambitious that I need to do, that I can like spec out all up front. I think that it's sort of a preference thing. I do think that like a lot of times when I see people who are, for example, running into limits on the max 20x plan, it's sort of like turning things into long running tasks when maybe they don't need to be, or like not like interrogating like, hey, do I know everything about this problem or something? I think you can definitely set up a problem where you're like, oh, like my task is I do the prompt and there are 5 verification agents and then then we fix the problems of the verification agents running and then it's running for 12 hours, but maybe you didn't need the 12 hours.
There's a little bit of a corollary / related question. Like, to what extent, and I think this was hinted at maybe in the developer day that you guys did, but like, to what extent is there a vision that like Claude Code should become more of like an actor as opposed to like a sort of a session machine? So like essentially like, one single session continuously compounding or compacting, like having memory, essentially feeling more like tactilely like an open claw.
Yeah, like proactiveness. I think that's definitely something we're working towards, right? I think proactiveness is another example of like how does it unlock in the capability overhang is actually like hard to say. I think that like, yeah, is it one Claude that just like you never worry about compact or context and it just spins off sub-agents as needed? Is there like an orchestration workflow, maybe more like workflows, or is it like a UX thing or something? So I think there's a lot to figure out there, but yeah, we're thinking a lot about it.
2 questions for you. You mentioned that evals are more of like an art than a science, and it's kind of, or maybe it's a little bit of both. Objectively, it can be a science, but over time, it's still an art, right? Because it's so non-deterministic and flexible. So I'm curious how you guys know when something is ready, like what type of evals you guys are running to know something is truly ready. And then the second question I have is that Anthropic, the pace that you guys are moving is so fast, right? And the quality is so high. So I'm curious how you would describe the way you guys work, whether it's in product development or even across the organization. That's very different than likely how other organizations are working and what your advice might be.
Yeah, I mean, so on the first part, I think harness engineering overall is an art. You know what I mean? Like, I think evals are a little bit more of a science because like you can, hill climb against them. I do think like designing evals is very, very hard. Like, I don't know if you guys saw the like Japanese guy who's like annotated like millions of images with bounding boxes or something. It's gotten kind of viral on Twitter, but it's like this guy who spent 3 years just like going through millions of images and drawing very specific bounding boxes around like the eyes of people and mouths and like the skeletons and stuff. And his like setup now like outperforms every other like, skeleton recognition and face recognition thing. But he's just like, it's mind-numbing work, you know what I mean? And it's even hard to like outsource because, like it's very high skill too, And so I think evals are one of these things where, yeah, it's actually almost hard to buy them even, right? Because like you need like very high skill people to do very honestly boring work, And so, yeah, you can't have an eval for everything. And for example, like, let's say that people are always like, okay, Claude Code feels dumber. You know what I mean? Like, in order for us to, like, if we run Claude Code against Sweetbench or Sweetbench Pro or whatever, that will measure like a software engineering performance. But like maybe what people are saying is that like sometimes Claude stops early, you know what I mean? When I think it should continue. Then we need a stop early eval, right? But how would we know we need that eval until we see the problem, And so I think there's like this, like you can't have an eval for any possible problem that Claude could run into. It's hard, I think. And evals are very, very valuable. I think like this is one of those problems where I sort of point people at sometimes when they're like, hey, like I want to get into AI, I want to do something. And I'm like, okay, great. Choose something low status and not like sexy or interesting. And like evals are like easily it, And then on your second point about stuff that Anthropic does, obviously, like Evan said, like the talent is very high. I think a particular thing I've appreciated about like Dario's approach is that I think sometimes you can say reasonable things about trade-offs. You know, you can be like, oh, okay, like here, pick two, like good, fast, cheap, you know, or something, right? And it's like, that makes sense, right? Like it's very reasonable that you would have to pick two out of these three things. But then it's like, well, no, what if we did all of them actually? You know what I mean? And like, I think sometimes you can sort of have this like reasonable product brain where you're like, hey, let's just prioritize these things and let's just like do the highly prioritized things. But like maybe you're wrong. Like, you know, maybe you can do all of these things, right? And I think that like forcing reality to show you like, oh no, these are the real trade-offs and how things trade off against each other is sometimes unintuitive. And it's better to be like maybe like somewhat unreasonable and just be like, hey, like, yeah, we can build a safe AI that also makes a lot of revenue and, you know, like brings, you know, a lot of like value to the world and we can race to the top. So yeah, I think that's something I've really appreciated. And
Let's spend a little more time here because I think this is one of the topics we wanted to talk about was like how AI is changing org design. And I think like examining how it's changed the Claude Code org is interesting as like maybe as a suggestion for how many of people's companies will eventually change. Like if you compare how you guys build a year ago to now with the new capabilities, are there specific things that come to mind in terms of like the ways you build feel very different to a year ago or maybe to like past lives building stuff that you would highlight as like, this is probably the new way given that we have these new capabilities?
yeah, I mean, I do want to say that I don't think there's one pattern for org management, and it's not even clear to me that the Claude Code team should be the pattern because we are very like dog food oriented, right? Like we're literally building the product to build the product, right? And so that has like a different feedback loop than maybe other organizations might. So I'm hesitant to say that the Claude Code team is a model for like, you know, how other organizations should work, but I think that like you can sort of think through some like first practices of like, how do you turn productivity into more, honestly, revenue, you know, is like ultimately the goal, right? And I definitely talk to customers who I'm like, if you doubled your PRs, you probably wouldn't even change your revenue at all. You know, like you just are not able to turn that into increased revenue because there's so much of org design is, for example, like buy-in, you know, and deciding what to do or like, do people even want this? Is the market saturated or not or something, right? And like, you know, most things fail. And so like you don't actually make more money if you fail faster necessarily, you know, unless you find the thing that really works. So I think that the prompt you use is like, okay, let's say that you're running a car dealership in like 1995 and email comes out. One thing you can do is like you can give your receptionist and your team email and they can communicate a little bit faster and they're going to be more productive. But I don't know if you'll sell more cars. Or you could like let people order cars via email, you know, and via the web, right? And hopefully that will like drive more revenue. And so I think trying to find that analogy for your specific problem, I think is one way to think about it.
Are there specific things that are super extreme or heretical that maybe have become normalized to you, but if like somebody were to drop into the Claude Code team as like member technical staff, they'd be like, this is totally different?
Probably some stuff I can't talk about. Yeah.
I think one thing I've observed is because it's so cheap to create, I've been trying to wrap my head around how do people prioritize now? And how do you prioritize work? Because you can kind of just spin up everything in parallel. And I think there's this weird tension with I'm not really sure, kind of the old ways in which you might like t-shirt size something. Like why even bother with that? And I'm just curious like how that's changed internally.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it still takes a lot of tenacity to make something, you know, and I don't think that amount has decreased almost at all, you know, and I think that when I see things that work at Anthropic, like Claude Design, as soon as I met Nate, I'm like, dude, this guy has it, you know what I mean? And I'm like, he really wants this to happen and he will make it happen, you know? And I think that like, yeah, like it's cheaper to make things, but now you have to get buy-in, you have to believe in it, right? And so I think that like, it should increase your exploration phase, but you're the one who has to decide, hey, I think this is it, you know, like this is the direction. So yeah.
Well, one additional question on org, and then I don't know who's next with a mic. You can pipe in. Hiring is probably pretty different now in sort of what you look for. are there specific questions or exercises that like are net new to Anthropic that probably other people should adopt when we're looking to hire really talented engineers?
I think Anthropic is probably like a very different place for hiring right now just because of demand. I also don't do much like interviewing myself these days. I think it's a hard problem. Like obviously you want people who are technical and understand the concepts, but you also want to know that they are good at AI, and these are two separate things.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can find someone who's good at one and not the other, and you need both. You guys probably honestly have more insight there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's sort of this sort of thought. There's tension with like somebody who's actually really experienced sometimes is probably doesn't have the neuroplasticity to actually build in this new way. And I'm sure we're all learning on the fly what that looks like. Question here.
So how are the people, or how's the Claude Code team using Claude Code, or how are you using Claude Code? Are you still like babysitting agents, like what I'm doing as we're speaking? Are you like using IDE? Are you using some kind of like special internal tool to manage the word trees? Are you using word trees at all?
Everyone does some things differently, basically.
What's your setup?
I tend to be in terminal. I've been using Claude agents recently. I tend to have at most maybe 2 or 3 things that I'm doing. I tend to do a lot of exploration. And so I tend to multitask less, I think, than the rest of the team. I think that it's like everyone is so completely different from each other. Like I know some people who like use GitHub as like a source of state. And so their agents will write to the issue, and then like when they wake it up again, it'll read from the issue and leave comments there and things like that. And they use it as a communication medium, for example. You know, like there's so many different setups, and yeah.
I guess on that note, and we'll go right over here, is like it's such Wild West with how people are doing things. Is it just Wild West even within the Anthropic teams, or is there a lot of there's like a process for sharing knowledge and best practices?
I mean, there is, but you also, everyone's always, experimenting and trying to find things as well. Yeah.
Maybe 2 questions packaged in one. So to what extent do you think harness design is domain specific? And to what are crazy things you've seen people use Claude Code for that you did not expect it to work for? So like auto research, when it came out, was kind of like, maybe you guys were already doing it, but to me it was new, it was cool. But maybe completely different domains or, use cases.
Yeah, is harness design is tricky, I think. Like I think you could probably imagine like before I came to Anthropic, I built a spreadsheet agent that was a code gen harness myself. And I do think that would outperform Claude Code at the specific spreadsheet like work. But would it outperform it in a way that's worth it, in the sense that the Claude Code harness is getting more on the exponential and I would need to continue to update this harness myself? I don't know, So, so your second question, like crazy things people have done with Claude Code. There was an interesting company I saw recently that does it like material discovery. And so basically what they do is like, you can write code to simulate the properties of a material object. And kind of like, a couple of years ago, there was this like LK99 superconductor thing that turned out to be fake. But like, what if you could simulate a bunch of these and then figure out like from the simulations, what should I test in the lab, and, go test them. So I thought that was like one of my favorite, like, in new ways to use Claude Code. Yeah.
I wanted to get your opinion on the 7x usage gap. So with research saying that power users are getting up to 7 times more advanced reasoning capabilities out of frontier models than the average users who are kind of merely using it as a search engine. As a builder, how are you thinking about designing the Claude Code interface in a way to kind of stop that? And can we have a UX design that stops that capability overhang by teaching the users to do more multi-step agentic tasks?
Yeah, I think there's both there. Like this is definitely like an interest I have in particular. I think in both we have to improve the agent UX, and I think that teaching people is very valuable, and so there's a lot of work to do in both ways. I think that like I am like I think there is some fatigue from people in like, oh, like I need to learn this new thing all the time, you know, and I think that kind of sucks. And I think ideally it should be Claude's job to do things for you and proactively and know exactly the right amount of things. But it's a hard problem, right? Because like, let's say that I have a request and Boris has a request, for example, like Boris knows the code base like in and out. If I'm like, hey, could you make this change? Maybe Claude should be like, okay, well, do you know that this change would have this follow-on effect? You know what I mean? And I'd be like, no, I didn't actually. But like Boris might be like, actually, yeah, I did. Why are you asking me? You know what I mean? And so I think there's this like, the model is very complicated. It's not just model and harness, it's model, harness, user, and like the world as well, right? Like what is possible, what code base are you operating in? What does the user know? And how does the user like model like both the world and the harness? And so, yeah, I think this is like one of the biggest problems in AI right now. Yeah.
So we have 10 minutes left, and I'm going to sneak this in because we were chatting about it on text. I think a lot of people are familiar with like the Aya Sauron notion, but because we have somebody who is at Sauron, it's worth asking. And obviously that was, I mean, admittedly, last time we were up here talking about it, it was kind of a very clickbaity type phrase. There's a lot that you can build that's still very interesting and modes can be built. But like, just a couple comments on from the inside, and you don't have to like share specifics. How would you advise a friend, your friends who are here at SBC, of navigating what is coming with models, how to actually build in a way that takes advantage of models versus getting steamrolled? Specific areas where like, you know, you'd be like, I don't know, buddy, like not a good one.
To start, I think AI is one of these things that is like, it's unpredictable for all of us. You know what I mean? And at Anthropic, like Dario's talked about how, for example, we have to pre-allocate how much compute we need to buy years ahead of time. You know what I mean? And it's very risky, right? Like, because we need to buy billions and billions of dollars of compute, and we need to hope that we will make that revenue. The way I think of it is that this is like kind of an age of exploration. You know, like I think everyone, including the frontier models labs, are like figuring out what is possible now. And it is like really exciting. There's so many unknown unknowns about, where is the direction going? How do you hire? How do you build? How do you organize a team? And it's like, I think some people look at you when you're making a startup and be like, this is like, why are you doing this? You know, like, it's like extremely like everything's changing all the time. Like, how do you know it's going to work? Like, what, you know, like, isn't Anthropic going to do this? Isn't OpenAI going to do this? So, I think at a high level, I think you just have to be excited about the exploration and uncertainty and like be like, no, I can do it. You know, like I really believe that I can do it, and have that sort of like internal confidence. I think is the most important thing, because it's not, I think, the safe thing to do anymore, and it was for a long time at Silicon Valley, or the high status thing to do. So I think that's one. I think specific areas of like how to think about it. Again, like, dude, I haven't.
Who's going to get steamrolled? Spill the beans.
Look, I'm not. No one's an expert. You know what I mean? Like, I haven't made a successful startup. You know what I mean? I think that probably one way to think about it is, can you be complementary to like the model lab thing? So, for example, like, so much of the world is not meant for agents right now. So agents can't access it. Like, an agent could not access your health data, your, you know, like, your banks, whatever, right? Like, can you make that more legible to the agents? There might be different payment mechanisms that need to happen there, but like the more you can take this like locked data source and turn it into something that, you know, the agents can use, that's like extremely, I think, helpful and valuable. How do you like disperse AI into like specific niches that may be more regulated, or like, you know, like need like have some like regulatory capture or something, I think is like extremely helpful. I think thinking about boiling the ocean. So instead of like putting AI in your product, can you use the AI product capabilities to do things that have like were just too ambitious to do before? You know, like I think that one of my I know Cheng, who made Pretext a little, and it's like this like custom text rendering library that, you know, he used to work on the React team, and he had all these problems with like text rendering on the browser, and then he was like, wait, I would never have been able to do this before, but now I can just do it, you know. And I think that like this idea of like, what's the thing where like, if you could write, what was a problem that needed like 20 million lines of code or 500 million lines of code or something, and can you solve that?
Yeah, your first point is resonant, I think, with one of the things we were saying, which is like, when building is cheap, kind of the moats are found in a lot of the human problems, and trying to access data is a human problem. It's like, how do you convince somebody to give you access, and like going through all the red tape. And I do think that is like one area of exploration to explore where you can be a little bit out of the quote unquote I, right? Because it's still going to require somebody with like a lot of tenacity who would just go and sell it and get in there and access whatever the data and the like these kind of legacy workflows that need to be transformed.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, you never know. You could maybe make a coding harness that's better than us. You know, you just have to believe in it. You know, so yeah.
I used to use one example. Like, let's say I use Conductor a lot. I think it's pretty popular. Just raised the big Series A. Just not speaking on behalf of Anthropic, but just as a person who looks at that, would you be like, in a previous world, you as a dev tool, you're like, that's interesting. There's a lot of pickup. People are liking this. Let's just go run after that. There's time. You can kind of figure out how to build a big business. But now in this day and age, is a product like that something you like squint at, or what is your reaction?
I think every product has like a bet on like where, you know, the capabilities are going. And I think Conductor is a good bet on models will commoditize out and maybe also S-curve out a little bit. I like Charlie. I think he's like really talented. And I think there are lots of good outcomes for like when you make something people love, you know what I mean? So I think you don't have to overthink it. Like, is this strategically the right thing? You know, like I think people love Conductor and I think they're going to do great no matter what. The models keep getting cheaper as well. So yeah, there's like, I think you need to take a bet and it's not clear, you know, which one will win.
Let's wrap there. So many questions, and we're lucky to have Thariq as part of the community. Thanks for coming back for a little longer deep dive, and we hope to have you back for more demos and whatnot. And you're always obviously welcome to just kind of hang. You know when lunches are. I'm sure lunches at Anthropic are pretty good too. But welcome in. Just round of applause for Thariq. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.